I end up making words in my drawings. So this was not by accident that you can read Tbilisi, and under that you have me sitting in a boat with my dirty laundry, which forms the word illustrator. So I don't consider myself that much as an artist. I love the word illustrator. I know many people don't like it too much because it has something like you're serving someone else, but I like to serve. These are images I made, that was right after 9/11 for a Belgian magazine. That was about autobiographics in that same magazine, literature magazine, and I come from that world. I worked for agencies and for magazines a bit all over the world, but mainly in France, Amsterdam, and Belgium, where I'm from. I made these for a Dutch magazine right after, I think, right after the Americans came into Iraq. But it's all that kind of themes, not really for children, in fact. That's where I came from. This was also for a magazine in Paris and for a Flemish magazine. And I only entered into the children's book world through my own children. Because I started reading Richard Scarry again for them. These are pictures for a calendar, postcards. In those days we wrote postcards. And we needed stamps to put on those postcards. So that is work from the beginning of this millennium. Cookie boxes. Or these were one of my first books. I think that's in 2003. And I made this book with all the pocket titles in French, which is a very thick book, which makes it interesting because you can work on the back of a book. It's rare to have such a space to communicate with people. And this was my first picture book. This was a CD booklet I made for a French publishing house. And there was one story, this story about a girl, Marie Jolie. The book is on display in hall 1 or 5, I'm not sure. 11. And the story was kind of a trigger for me because it brought a lot of things together, like what Chris said, like these different dialogues you could have in your head and try to establish with a possible reader. And this was about New Orleans. I've been in New Orleans, but I've always been attracted to the music from New Orleans. And it was also about Africa. It was about, in fact, it was an African story that this French writer situated in New Orleans. So she changed the context, but the story was a very old African story about a girl that doesn't want to marry and what could happen to you if you don't want to marry, and then she ends up marrying the devil, and then she has to escape that. So these are the kind of sketches I make when I'm on the train to Paris. So it's a very good train to make sketches. And this is the kind of images I make. I must confess that compared to other illustrators here, I'm more like a very home-based type of illustrator. So I need lots of time spending in my workshop, which is a shack in my garden. And then I paint a lot. So I need to paint, well, I don't do it now, or I did it yesterday with you. But usually I paint every day. And I quite stick to that medium, just because it gives me some kind of comfort. Like, I don't have to reinvent it every time again. And this was my final scene of New Orleans, which is also completely different than what you saw from Chris with the very big collages or paintings he made. This is a very small one. This is an A3. I don't know if you use the German standards, the DIN A3. So it's not very big, but to me it was important to make it so small. So sometimes I really want to go into miniature, and then other times I do very big things. This was one of my first series in France that was successful, which is, it's not a nice word to use, but it's also important to have some books that really sell well. And especially that first book, it sold very well, so it gave me a lot of liberty afterwards of just being able to do what I want to do. These are some sketches and some images from it. But these are all old books. These were the images I made on you can see them in an exhibition here. Another book I did with the same writer, which was an ABC, which was the first time I really used my letters in a children's book. For instance, for the B, this is the train sketch when I'm on my way to Paris. And then it also has that New Orleans feel. There's Fats Domino standing there behind the piano, because he has something of a bee. And then I start painting like that, and I put layer on layer on layer, and then it becomes something like this. The colors are not really what they are on the original. But the nice thing about this book was, I don't know if I have an image. This was the R and the S, the T and the U. As you can see, there are many letters linked to other places in the world. The V and the W, a bit German. The Volkswagen, VW. The X and the Y. The Y is a kind of a strange letter because he's in French. Letters are always masculine. It's always le A, le B, le C. But I really wanted to put some female figures in it as well. So I made some kind of a geisha that when you look well, you can see some breast hair coming out of that nightgown. And the Z. I made a lot of letters while sketching for that book, and those letters were used on children's doors. You have these wooden letters. In Belgium, children do, or parents do that with their children. They put the name of the child on the door. And so mostly it's like clowns or animals. But these letters were used by a French company. And then I had so many letters, so many different A's, so many different B's, and I started working on another alphabet, which I wrote in French, which was an advantage for me because French is not my native language, but my second language. And to me that gives some kind of a liberty. So you're not so anxious about making faults or making mistakes. In fact, very often when you use another language, you come up with strange new versions of that language, and very often it's appreciated by the native speakers. That's my experience. This was the A. As you can see, it's a bit, to me, well, this was digitally composed. So I painted all these letters, and then I invented the story, and it was, to me, it was very much influenced by Richard Scarry, who's probably the most important illustrator for me as a child. He was important, and I always had this link with him. So in some ways, to me, it's like 21st century Richard Scarry or something like that. The C, the D. So in this book, I tried to do something very subtle for me, to keep it very simple. Well, at the end of the book, I started complicating things. And like, these were the papers, how do you call them in English? The end of the book. This is something completely else that leads me to my latest books. It's a series about a boy named Otto. And so Otto, it also means car in some languages, in my language at least, or in French. And I made these cars for a children's mobile. You say that in English? Like these things you hang on top of the cradle, and then they move around. We call it mobile. And the funny thing was I could play with the back side and the other side. Like one direction they were just cruising, and then the other they had to marry because they're rabbits. And then you have like a New York cap and a King Kong, or there you have a little truck from the town I live in, and on the other side, the saw had become a Christmas tree. So you have this toaster, and on the other side it became an elephant. So as I already explained to some, to me the playing element is very important. I mean, no playing, no children's books for me. If I couldn't play in it, I would be doing other things. So that's what I love about making books, just playing around until I reach a point where I can communicate with others. This was a calendar I made, so there are 12 months. And the funny thing, the conception of this calendar was like you could see it from every angle. And I used that idea when I started working on my first auto book, which is, it's a loop book, so you can, at the end of reading the story in that direction, you can flip it around and then you can read the other side. That's why so many vehicles are upside down. But the text, I think I have a version here without text, so there is text, just simple lines of text that lead the reader through the books. And this is the main character. And I chose like a very grey character, someone who's not important. I've always been a Tintin fan. And what I love about it is like Tintin himself, he's like Mr. Nobody or Mr. Everybody. And I wanted to do something similar with this little cat. He's just what I try to do is trying to see the world. Just he sees the world from the backside of a car. So here I prove that it's all Photoshop composed. It's a background, and then I put the cars in it, and I can play with Playmobil or Lego. In fact, when I was making those books, I was working in another room still, and I couldn't draw the alts without going always higher. So this must be like 1,500 meters high, and then it goes up to well, this is 1,500 meters. And then once Otto has learned to ski, he goes up to 2,100 meters, and that's where the trees stop growing. And then he's on top of the world, which is a feeling that I really love. I loved it as a kid, and I love it. I still love it. Those books were also like pocket editions. And 2 years ago, I made an auto book. It was one image that I painted. This is a very big painting, like 3 on 2 meters. And first I made like a grid of an imaginary city, and then I started putting these Kodachrome colors on it, in which you can see some Richard Skelly if you want. There's this little snake, and there's a big apple. And then I chose some parts of that map for the pages of that book. This is the poster. This is the poster. At the end, you have the whole map, but I don't think I have images from the book itself. So these are Otto is going through all these different sides of town, and this is more like the old city, and this is more like the business district, and the airport, and the commercial center, the sports and culture center. So he sees a lot of things, yeah, from daily life, or from the life, the way the adults have constructed it. But I wanted to do something completely different this year. So I started working in my garden in the shack on all kinds of wood. I had a friend who works in a big public garden, and he gave me all these kinds of different kinds of wood, from sequoia trees to oaks, and it's a story about an oak. This was more the olden part of it, and this is the final cover, more or less. But you see, like, I've been traveling. while I was making the book, I was constantly thinking that this was going to be the cover. But finally, we chose an image from inside the book, or I made a variation of an image inside the book. You can see the originals at the other side. But here you see them with typography. To me, it was kind of important to write it myself, because it was, well, it was only one sentence, so it was possible. And then it was also important to have the right rhythm, and we didn't get there with the designer, so I did it myself. So it starts with an acorn falling from a tree, and it keeps on rolling, but it got stopped by a little stone, and then a squirrel passes by and he brings it with him, and he puts it in his hiding place, but he forgets about it. And then after winter, in springtime, in that hiding place, the little acorn starts to grow. Funny thing is, in my language, acorn, it means squirrel, which is kind of funny. But there's a snail passing by, and he forgets about it. And then the tree is growing, but the summer is so hot that it's almost dying of thirst. But then there's this miraculous summer rain falling down, and it makes it grow. And then in the spring afterwards, there's a deer passing by, and it eats a lot of leaves, but this tree is already big enough to survive the deer. And then comes the winter, and luckily people are looking for Christmas trees, but luckily he's not a Christmas tree, so they leave him. And then there's a big fire. There are the lumberjacks passing by, but they didn't put a cross on him. And then he's still standing there all alone, and the people have made a big field next to it, but he could still stay there. And then there's an image missing. Then the humans, there's a family arriving, and they construct a house, but it's the children who decide. You can see the image in the exhibition. The children decide that it's an excellent place for a tree house. So the tree survives. That's the simple idea of this story. This is something completely different. I made this for Belgian television, and while I was making this, I turned off the green background, and I kind of loved just the idea of having a complete black background, and also the idea of just working with more typography and less illustration. So the other book I made this year, this was for the television. So you see the combination of the painting and the typography that I've been putting on it, painted and digitally. To me, it's not such an important difference. This is an encyclopedia I made in France 2 years ago, where I participated. It was like a collective work with 10 or 12 illustrators, and here grew the idea that I really love those. This was an homage to Diderot, who was the inventor of the encyclopedia, the way we know it these days. And we just got the themes from his old encyclopedia, and I think the typography still makes a link. This was about visual artists, and this was about musicians, and I also did architecture. I did the culture section, and I like this idea of making some kind of, in French they call it a répertoire. It's like it's a stupid idea, but I love the idea, trying to capture the whole world in a simple book, which is impossible, of course. So I started working on this one in May, and it says in Dutch, the biggest imagery word book or something very... I didn't invent the title, it was my editor.
And it was probably like Richard Scarry did that too. It's like the biggest whatever, but it was more like a curse, because once she came up with that title, I was saying like, okay, then it must be the biggest and the best. And so it was a very time-consuming project in which I tried a lot of things. Well, for me it was nothing. It was like 6 months, but really concentrated on this one thing, and all my other work I had to do. I had to find some night hours, and during the day I was constantly working on this. And it's not far enough from me yet to say if it's a good book or not at all. But you see a lot of things in it, like also this idea like showing 50 countries and already just making the selection of these 50 countries. Who would want to do this? Well, I did. So it's countries I have in some way some relation to or whatever. So since this is the first time I'm in Georgia, there is no Georgian flag on it. Next edition, yeah. So when I sticked a bit to this Richard Scarry approach, like I just established the main characters who are very diverse in a way that you have these football players from Argentina, and they are all over the book. I don't know why, I'm not a football fan, but I like Argentina. And there's a fox who always has some clever ideas, or a little mole who always digs a little deeper. And they are communicating with the reader, or that was the idea. While Otto, who's there on top, he's just watching, and he just sees things. So on the first spread, I present hope, or what that could be, because that's very different for lots of people. I made this spread in June, but after the holidays, someone brought me a book from Portland, a very good English book. I think it only exists in English, and it's by Carson Ellis. And she makes beautiful drawings. She made beautiful drawings for her husband on a CD cover, or different artwork, like Into the Woods. No, it's Into the Wild Woods. Wild Woods is the name of the book, I think. But this was her first picture book, and it's funny to see how she came up with similar ideas, but different. This is probably seen from a shack in a garden in a small country in Western Europe. This is that garden. So this is the house where I live up there, and this is the garden, but not at all the way it is. It's just the way I constructed it 2 weeks ago, in fact. And while I was not maintaining the garden in a proper way, I was working in my imaginary garden. And in that garden you have a lot of birds. So I explained a bit. There is some scientific proof for some things, but other things are just made up by the illustrator. But it's all in Dutch, so it would be hard to translate all this. And then after the birds, I went to the other birds, to the airport. It's a bit the inspiration for the plane we made yesterday. This is not Virgam Airlines. This is a barely legal low-cost company, and it's filled with bears. If you watch close, then you can see that there are a lot of bears that still have to go in that plane. And then you have the other harbor, the boats, and then from the boats I go to the underwater world, and then from there is one to make that city at night. And when I made this drawing, that was the weekend of the Paris attacks, like 2 weeks ago now. So the strange thing was I had made this in summertime, and I had turned over the Eiffel Tower, and then that became a symbol of something completely else. So I was wondering, like, can I leave it like that, or should I flip it over again? So during the nighttime, I flipped it over. So there are some points of light around it. This is the city the way I see it. It's like it's always evolving and it's under construction. And it's a bit the way I see illustrations in general. It's like, for me, they're always under construction, and it's mostly my editor or my wife or my kids who say, like, come on, that's enough, quit it. Because to me there can always be new stories infiltrating in a drawing. This is the sports pages, which is a bit confusing. It started chaotic, and I didn't find a way to make it more structured, but there are like 12 sports explained on this page, with football inevitably the biggest part of it, because it's all over our country. This is the arts pages, so this is a workshop of artists, visual artists. And then you have music and all. And what you have in this book, I didn't intend it to be like that, but it's also 1 year in the life. So it's this was somewhere on page 14. I have a spring spread, and then on page 26 you have the same scene, but during summertime. So there's a summer camp and there's a nightclub. All stuff that I associate with summer. Autumn, which is with back to school and that kind of stuff. And then winter. And then they're preparing for the ending of the year. Christmas and New Year. And then Otto has to go to bed. Because I think it's going to be my last Otto book. I'm not going to write it in the book, but in my heart, well, this character, I've always linked it with my children, and now they're 11 and 13, and they're no longer this character. And in some way, the character is no longer fed by real life for me, which is, I'm not someone who needs to see the things in reality when I have to paint them. But in some strange way, I must be fed by reality and by things happening around me. And that's the final spread. It's like elephants on parade, because no one has seen it, but on every other image there were elephants. There is this expression about not seeing the elephant in the room, and this is the proof of it. You didn't see this elephant, or maybe you saw this one. But you didn't see that one behind the cabin, or this one, the gray one, who will disappear a little more because he's going to be in the folding of the book, which is also something I love to play with that imaginary line that is always in your image. I don't know where the elephant is here. Here it is also. Oh, this is a cute one. This elephant just fell in love with the caravan, because he looks a bit sad. Or do we have an elephant here? Maybe it wasn't in it yet when I made it. You see one? Oh yeah, there you go. You see, I'm probably the worst person, like these books, Where is Wally or something? They exist in Georgian too, I suppose? Or Where is Wally? Wally? I'm really the worst finder of Wally. In general, I never find it. I don't have patience for it. So it's strange why I do these things. Well, okay, this was it. If you have any questions, please. Don't feel obliged either.
Where's the other one? Where's the one? So,
printed work. Yeah, it does. It does. So when you make I would like to know about the technical stuff. So you make also the typesetting. You do it all by hand, don't you?
Well, this typesetting, it's like a worst case typesetting. I chose so we don't use this typeface, but I chose a typeface that needed a lot of space. So I know that if we will translate it in other languages, there will always be enough space. So this is a particular case. Like this is all written by hand.
Then my question is, because you're publishing very multilingual, I'm sure, and being published in many countries. Do you redo this every time for every edition in a different language?
If we find the budget, I do it. It's time consuming, but the funny thing is, like, if you do it for some books, the book always gets better. I didn't know that in advance, but it's like I did it with an ABC, and we first translated it from French to German, and it became a better book, just because there was someone else who was working on it, who had some good ideas. And then we translated it to Dutch, to my native language, and I think it even became better, because every time you learn, it's like revisiting a place and saying, like, with a fresh head or a fresh set of eyes, you look at it and suddenly you're an outsider and you say, like, oh, but all these things you wanted to say, they didn't work. If you would do it this way, then probably it's going to be easier. I know you don't like this idea of trying to fit in this dialogue reader maker.
No,
but for me that's very important.
No. Of course I like to. No, absolutely no.
Okay. Then I misunderstood you the other time.
No, I was saying an absolutely different thing. No,
okay.
It's not about that. No, I'm just, because like some of our books are also working with handwritten typesetting, and we have no much other choice because we don't have like good typefaces to work with.
Yeah,
so many of the books we're doing are or will be written by hand. So that's why I'm asking.
And you consider that as a good thing in general, or the fact that they write their books?
I just think that the principle of Latin and Georgian type of script, they are built on different principles, and it is very hard to translate this.
Yeah.
And me myself, when I work with letters, the Latin letter forms, they have some sort of established way of constructing, which we do not have in this way in Georgian. So in Georgian you have to be more inventive in things, or more. Somehow it's harder to do this.
But you could be the first one to have like an ABC Georgian, or it exists?
No, not that I know of. I don't think there exists a really something. And another question: are you? This is acrylic, isn't it?
Yeah, almost all of it is acrylic. Here, no, the one we're looking at, it's all just markers. I made all this typo black and white, and then I changed the colors in Photoshop. But like this is acrylic. The backgrounds. It's something once I start really working with color. I don't know how I came into acrylic, but I know why. Because when I worked for all these just-in-time projects I did in the 90s, it was important that it was dry before the guy who came to catch the original took it with him to another city, and so I had no choice. I had to work with acrylic, and then for some reason I love the fact that it's multi-layered and all that kind of stuff. No more questions?
Could you process of your work? I mean, you showed us that you begin with sketches, but when you work, do some details appear on the way, in the way of working or in the process, or do you know at the beginning that always?
No, in general, I don't know much, and it's just like, to me, important in an image is like there is some kind of composition, but that could be almost abstract, like a circle there and a square there, and just that there is some kind of construction where you can feel, like a football field. You have the lines, and then you can play. So that's a bit what I do. It's like I like, as I said, I want to play, and I don't want to know where I'm gonna end. I want to me, making a book more than images for magazines. It's like wandering around through a landscape or through a city and just being open to see what appears and what. But many of it's not like it's transcendental or so. It's just like I don't know on beforehand where I'm going to end.
Thank you.
I would like to, yeah, I think it's wonderful what you're talking about, and maybe if you could talk a little bit more about this idea of having the whole world in a page, and the idea of panopticon. I think it's amazing. Some very old cultures use or try to talk about it. Yes, and Umberto Eco has the book about the collections. So I see that very strongly, and it's very powerful. So if you could talk a little bit more about it.
I don't know if I can add much to it, but I think it's a very human reaction to try to gather all knowledge in one library, like in Alexandria, or like well, we've always tried to do that, and it was just by working on that Diderot project that I said, like, yeah, I have something with this idea, this stupid idea of it's probably when you're a parent, when you're a father, it's what you do with your kids in some way. You're acting during 10 years or so, and then that ends. But you're acting like if you have all the answers, and you can react on every situation in the world in a correct way, and you have the intellectual capacities to do that. While I'm very much convinced that there's no such thing, but just the attempt, the hubris, the fact that you want to do that makes it worth the time-consuming activity. But I don't know if that's sufficient as an answer to you.
Yes, because when you talk about this, you set the example of Alexandria. So each book is also, it's contained by this big collection, but it is a collection, so it goes to the infinite.
The funny thing is, when I was making this book, I usually work, when I make such a collage, I'm always painting at the same moment, and I say like, oh, I need more musicians, or I need more football players, or because I don't have enough of them. And while making this book, I said like, no, during 2 months I forbid myself to paint, and I went looking for characters in my own books of the last 10 years. So in some way it's an encyclopedia of my own books. So you have like, I made a book. For some examples. Like this guy who's just cut the tree. He comes from one of my very first books, and I didn't repaint him. It was really, I cut him out in Photoshop, and I used him like this, and because it was like, to me, also a way of saying like, okay, limit yourself and try to use as much as possible the things you already have, all the toys you have, and then try to concentrate on the story, well, it's hard for you to make a story out of this, but there is some story in it. Although it's very, very dispersed, you say that in English? It's very all over the place. So.
Do you have anything coded in there that only you know about?
Sorry?
Do you have any things coded in this book that only you know about?
No, I don't like coded things.
No.
So probably there are some
So
things
the images that means something to you.
There is like, it's not even on one of those, because the book has 64 pages, but there is like the old Volvo my dad used to drive with when I was 4 years old. He's in it. So if you mean that,
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Yes.
So it's just me, my sister, and my brothers who can imagine something about that, but it's too. It's just details. So it's not so important to me.
It's really important to me to know there are things like this.
So can I go? Yeah, so what I already suggested is like, yes, it's very important for me to be a dad. I don't think I would be making children's books. It sounds very conservative, and I know, but it's just the way it is. It's just an emotional thing. So that's the funny thing about making images. It's always like this mixture between emotion and ratio, and I used to think of myself as a very rational person, but the longer I work, the longer I must say like I'm a very emotional person. Sorry.